360, the show produced by the Washington Diplomat, which for over 25 years has served as the premier source of information and news for the diplomatic community here in Washington, D.C. We want to thank our sponsors, Cigna, a health services company that operates worldwide, as well as Sahori Insurance, which has been serving the diplomatic community for over 50 years. I'm Anna Gawel, the managing editor, and here's my co-host, Eric Ham. Hi, Eric.
Hi, Anna. Good to be here. So much to talk about, so little time.
Election aftermath. And I sent out the invites. I was like, it's over, sort of.
I was gonna say, is it really?
Yeah, not really. So if you notice, we're wearing our Diplomat Pride. We don't work at a gas station. We got Washington Diplomat. And I thought about this before the show of, well, it's blue. We're actually not trying to make a statement with the blue. At the Diplomat, we have the blue for over 25 years. But in case anyone is concerned, I have a red jacket. I can put it on. Eric, there's a little bit of red in the logo.
Yeah, there's a little bit of red, right?
It's like the red mirage. So I am going to today skip my slightly long-winded introduction, and because there's so much to talk about, don't even know where to begin. So we're just gonna begin with you, Eric. I'm gonna have you take the baton. This is your wheelhouse. What's going on? What are your thoughts?
Well, prior to this webcast, we have done so much leading up to this, talking about what would the election mean for relationships with China, Europe, NATO, Russia. And now that we see that we have a president-elect, Joe Biden, I think now what we can expect are many of the things that we talked about to come to fruition. We know that there's going to be a massive reset in terms of what a Biden administration will look like versus a Trump administration. But because we're still seeing American democracy play out, the wheels continue to spin. I think the big takeaway from this is how this election actually played itself out, and also how it's continuing to play out. Because again, what we're seeing from President Donald Trump is what we have seen from the moment he walked down that gilded escalator, is a man who continues to break norms, a man who does not conform to the notions and ideas, not only of a US politician, but also as an arbiter of American politics. And so already we see a president who is unwilling to concede. We see a president who is unwilling to acknowledge the sanctity of the election and what the American people have said. And so not only is the country, I think, watching with a level of anxiety about what has happened and what is to come, but also I think we're looking at global leaders and the world continuing to watch. In fact, my wife spoke to a friend in the Congo last night, and that friend asked my wife, has your president conceded yet? So the world is literally watching to see what President Donald Trump will do, and what is he going to do, and what will the outcome and what will the fallout be from any of his actions. So I think we saw the nation get past an election that saw millions upon millions of people vote. And I think that's something that America can stand proud of, the fact that democracy worked. We saw, again, in a pandemic, no less, with millions of people who have now contracted this virus. We're at over 10 million people who have contracted the virus, but still more than nearly 150 million Americans, that's a record, a number of people voted in this election. And yes, we still have some states, I'm talking to you, Arizona.
We won't name any names, Arizona.
Right, who still has not completed their count. But still, I think what we have seen the process play out, and even though President Donald Trump is unwilling to concede, and even though he's continuing to challenge the results in the court of law, that still shows, I think, democracy at work. It shows our citizenship at its best, because even with our dissent, America shows who it is, because we show that even though we may not be agreeable and that we can disagree with one another, there are outlets in terms of how we express our displeasure or that disagreement. And we do it in ways that does allow America to continue to move forward. But more importantly, it is a showcase for the world of how democracy works. It's not always pretty. Oftentimes it can be messy, but in the end, we get to where we ultimately want to be and where we need to be as a country.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's such a good point to reiterate and keep reiterating, because, you know, so many people did vote, you know, still counting Nevada, but not naming any names or anything, you know, but, you know, and I think what's interesting is the points that you brought up, the webcasts that we've had up until now. We talked a lot about China, Russia, EU, NATO, Middle East, and so forth. You know, everything we've said is pretty much what there is to say with the Biden administration. You know what you're going to get when it comes to a lot of these regions. And you can argue that you know, you lack that unpredictability, that element of disruption. But for, I think, many parts of the world, Mr. Predictable is a good thing. You know, after 4 years of unpredictability, at least in terms of foreign policy. And, you know, you mentioned the millions and millions of people who cast their votes. And I think, you know, we go back here to, we always say the word mandate. And I think most people knew that Biden would win the popular vote. I think a lot of people were surprised by, though, how close it was. And a big part of that is the Electoral College. That's a whole other webcast of historians and, you know, squabbling over what the founding fathers intended. But, you know, it was close. And I think we also have to, you know, regardless, I mean, you know, forgive me, I don't know the exact numbers of Biden ultimately probably be up by 5 million or so votes. But, you know, President Trump did get millions, 7 million, I think, more votes than 2016. You know, the Democrats lost seats in the House. The Senate is a complete toss-up and could very well continue to be in Republican hands. So, you know, in terms of this mandate, I would kind of say it's you know, fancy word, it's an iffy mandate, you know, I think. And I think the two things I wanted to point out is, you know, of course, hindsight is 2020. I don't think a lot of people predicted this blue wave, and, you know, the red mirage did kind of happen where you hadn't counted the mail-in ballots yet. But I think the two things that struck me were polls, again, and the amount of campaign money raised. Those two indicators to me have for months been utterly useless. When I see these emails, I'll take a cursory glance at them and delete them. I think that this is the two things that stood out for me. They're useless for two reasons. One, the polls, nothing changed from 2016. You have this phenomenon of they call, you know, the shy Trump voter who, you know, will not admit their support or their vote for Trump. And I mean, it's not, in my mind, there are various reasons, but it's not rocket science. I mean, if you don't trust Washington and you don't trust the media, are you about to answer a Washington Post ABC poll? I mean, I don't know why we thought the polls were accurate. You saw nothing that happened in 2016 was fixed for 2020. So, and then the other thing, you know, so many headlines were saying, you know, Biden has raised this amount of money, this amount of money. I mean, it really, though, at some point, you know, what does it matter if you blanket the airwaves if you're only preaching to the choir? I mean, at some point, it's just annoying. You're going after this elusive, undecided voter. But I feel like, you know, unless you're dropping some campaign ad that's like, you know, really like the Swift vote, you know, ads against John Kerry, you know, you're not going to shift, you know, public opinion dramatically. So I never understood why those were huge indicators to begin with. And And so again, I think it fits this larger pattern of Democrats thinking, oh, well, polls say this. Oh, well, campaign funding is this. I don't think ultimately that was hugely, either of those things were really relevant. So yeah, I deleted a lot of emails. That was me.
Well, luckily for me, a lot of that stuff went into my spam folder.
There
so I
you
could
go.
right. So I could just hit delete and the whole thing would just disappear, which is great. But I think you're spot on. But I do believe what we have seen, what this election told us about President Trump, and I think many people didn't get this, and we didn't get this for 4 years, was that President Trump showed just how durable and elastic he is, both as a candidate and as a president. Because while he did lose to the person who received more votes than any other candidate in US presidential history, he came in second. And I think, and also one of the reasons why Republicans down ballot did so well is because, in fact, Trump was on the ticket. And we saw a lot of split ticketing going on during this race, where people may have voted one way at the top of the ticket and voted another way down ballot. And Republicans have Donald Trump to thank for that. And back in 2013, I wrote a book. It was titled "The GOP Civil War: Inside the Battle for the Soul of the Republican Party." And I thought the next chapter of that book would be the GOP extinction, because I thought the GOP was on its way out. But what Trump has done is Trump has revived, an entire political party, and he has given it life. He has made it relevant, and he has given it a place. And I think now the question becomes, what will his post-presidency look like, and how will he use this base of support, which we now know is far bigger than we thought it was,
and not durable.
Right, not enough to expand, lead to a majority, but still, it's big enough to where it has a voice and it needs to be heard. And so I think how he uses that and in what way he uses that, I think, will be important, not only for the president personally, but also its impact on our politics and where we go, because the country is deeply, deeply divided. And we've got some really difficult challenges in this nation. And Joe Biden is going to have, he's got a very tall order to fill, not only with a recalcitrant Republican Party, but also now we're starting to see some of the fissures even within his own party, that he's got to navigate all of this, all the while trying to combat a pandemic that is now raging to more than 120,000 cases per day and 1,000 deaths per day. So he's got all of that to deal with. And the world continues to watch. And we know that the expectations of many world leaders are, I think, going to be high, in the sense that they are expecting Joe Biden to bring normalcy back to the table, right, to basically rewrite this ship. And also just to touch on that very quickly, because we have seen a number of world leaders congratulate Joe Biden on his victory. We have seen Boris Johnson, who many saw as President Trump's, ideological twin. And, and it was interesting watching him in the House of Commons just a couple of days ago, speaking about how close he is to Joe Biden and how well he
climate change. All of a sudden, I'm going to talk about climate change.
Right. It's like already just with, and again, what I think what this election has said is, not only is, I won't say that America is back, but I think what it speaks to is America never really went away. I think people just may have, figured, okay, we need to let America was going through a midlife crisis, and people felt like, we need to give America some space to deal with its issues. But now that they figure, oh, America has worked its issues out, we are so glad to have you back in the fold. I mean, to see Turkish President Erdogan, issue a congratulations to Joe Biden, I was really struck by that, because I didn't think that we would hear something like that from him. But I think that speaks just to the deep reservoir of goodwill not only for a Biden administration, but also for the United States writ large. And I think that says a lot about, and this election just speaks volumes to what we're seeing take place.
Yeah. And you have so many fragile democracies who are looking to the US to say, you need to work this out, which is why I think Trump's concession, I don't really know if he will ultimately give one, but why the legal process that is playing out is so critical, because we have to show that, you know, our institutions are durable, that we can survive this. And, you know, the world is watching. I think they're going to keep watching for another few weeks, just like the rest of us. And I mean, predictions are hard, but you mentioned, you know, Trump's base being heard and President Trump being heard. I'm going to predict that Trump will continue to be heard for quite a long time.
I think that goes without saying.
It's a safe prediction, and of course, you know, that gets into a whole other issue. But you know what? You mentioned a deeply divided country, so I want to touch on two aspects of this. You know, one thing is, you know, even when I mentioned the Swift Boat ad campaign, you know, I remember at the time, John Kerry's people were like, you know what, the public's not going to take this seriously. This is smearing a war veteran. This is just so sensationalistic. It's just a flat out lie. But it did influence people. Yes. I feel like the Democrats are playing by a pre-2016 stale playbook. Now, and what I mean by that is they don't, you know, it's going to be kind of a controversial position, but I think they're failing to adopt these Trumpian tactics, so to speak, which is you hit your opponent hard and you hit them with an emotional gut punch. And we know Joe Biden ran his campaign on coronavirus, and that makes utter perfect sense. I mean, there's not just like issues. That is the issue. The country cannot move forward with anything until we deal with coronavirus. I mean, you look, one day it was 100,000 infections a day, and now it's a few days later 145,000. So we are heading into what could be the worst of it. So, you know, of course I understand that his campaign was laser focused on that. But, you know, even before then, I don't know about you, but what surprised me was that the Biden campaign did not hit harder on Trump. That they did not, for instance, okay, we could bring up corruption scandals. We brought them up, but make them in a way that would be relatable to people. You know, hey, you have cabinet members who have a lot of money who, instead of flying coach, took military aircraft to go 3 hours somewhere. You know, I was just surprised you didn't have more of this, you know, here is this daily category of falsehoods. You know, I will never golf as president, but I spent 1 hour of every 5 days on the golf course. You know, like, why you didn't do more ads that the average person could relate to? You know, President Trump has projected himself as this everyman persona, but, you know, by accounts that we've seen, has not really paid taxes. You know, Democrats have not mastered. If it were Republicans, they would have made a viral hashtag, what's he hiding? By that, you know, I feel like their strategy is to, for instance, talk about Joe Biden's character, his long record of experience, civility, compromise. Of course that matters, but these words don't resonate with a lot of people like they used to. People want to hear, what did you do during that time? What tangible effect did you have over your decades of service? And I think the 1994 crime bill haunted him and tripped him up, where, you know, I saw only one ad where Biden talked about how he helped push through MRAPs, mine-resistant vehicles for military troops. So, you know, that there would be fewer deaths for military troops, things like that. I felt like, you know, Democrats could have seized on, this is how the tangible improvements that Biden made in your life. And to me, that is one of the things that Trump successfully did, is he went away from these boilerplate political buzzwords and platitude, and he was plain spoken. Now, I don't think you go to the extreme where, you know, you lower the bar in terms of coarseness and you have a president who is cursing or flat out lying. You know, you certainly don't go there. But to me, that's what struck me, that they just assumed people would be so outraged by these ridiculous tweets and so forth that they would automatically go toward Biden. And that did not happen. I mean, that really, it wasn't this tied. I mean, of course, we can't negate the fact that, 5 million more people, as you said, Joe Biden got the most votes, of any president. But that's what, as a strategist, always struck me, is that they're still playing by this old playbook that doesn't resonate with average people, to me.
I think one reason why we saw the campaign operate in that way is because they saw this as a referendum on President Trump. And I think they wanted to keep it there.
Yeah.
And I think, and also President Trump did enough to make this a referendum on himself. So and so I think the Biden campaign calculated that basically, let's give this man enough rope and he will hang himself. And so as long as this was a referendum on Donald Trump, then I think that benefited Joe Biden. And you're right. I think in every other election, the challenger, no matter who it was, they needed to be able to get over this hurdle of, can this person make my life better than what it has been for these last 4 years? And I think what the public was asking itself is, will another 4 years of Donald Trump make my life better than the previous 4 years? So in many ways, this was an election where Trump was running against Trump. And I think Joe Biden was very smart in many ways to kind of like stay out of the way. That's why for so long we saw him in his basement. And even a week before the election, it was Joe Biden didn't have anything on his schedule like that Monday, a week before the election. And it was only like at the last minute that they sent him to Philadelphia.
Right.
And that's because, again, I think this was a campaign that figured, we're going to let Trump be Trump. Let's make it all about Trump. And then the people are going to make a decision if they want him or if they don't want him. I mean, that's not, the way Joe Biden ran this race is not the way you will run against any other candidate. But I think Trump was, he was someone that we have not seen, in the last 100 years.
He's his own best friend and his own worst enemy.
That's exactly
right. For people who have followed politics, what we didn't see, which I was expecting and I think hoping for, was that scrappy Biden. Biden can go toe to toe. I mean, he is a moderate. There's no doubt. Biden is a moderate. He knows how to work across the aisle. He believes he believes in civility. He believes in compromise. But he is a scrappy candidate. But like you said, he's also known to make flubs. And they're like, you know what? Just stay in the basement, like you said, himself. But I want to touch on a more serious note. You mentioned, and this is ultimately always what elections come down to, how has my life changed or improved? This is something I hear a lot from people who support Trump, which is, I understand I don't agree with the things he says. I mean, the more serious things that he says. I don't agree with, obviously, the scandals. But, I'm willing to overlook that because, the establishment has ignored me. And, I want real, tangible, I want to be paid attention to. And I think, there's at the moment, both sides need to take a really long, hard look in the mirror. Now, I would say to Trump supporters, and this will be, my pointed commentary, and I have more for the other side, of how did your life improve over the last 4 years, other than a lot of rhetoric? And was it worth you turning your back on your morals? That's the hard question I think Trump supporters need to ask. Now, on the flip side, I think Democrats need to ask, why did you turn your back on American manufacturing and think that globalization, take that as gospel? I think Trump hit the nail on the head with that. You had solid Democratic voters who switched because they said you felt like manufacturing was a lost cause. Now, I personally don't believe that this golden era of manufacturing can come back in an era of globalization, not the way that it looked like in the 50s and 60s. But it is true that President Trump has latched onto issues that were not necessarily things he cared about. I mean, it was, immigration, law and order. He's latched onto issues that have come up and taken advantage of them. But he has, for much of his career, talked about manufacturing and talked about China in ways that Democrats dismissed. And that had such a huge impact. I think it's one of those things that will have a durable impact. And so to me, I mean, I guess you don't want to say morality, but that's where each side, I think, kind of veered. And I want to say, one more thing in terms of, I mean, the other thing, the fracking debate. This was a classic example to me when Biden had to back off of, on the issue of manufacturing. I think Democrats have missed the boat of dismissing it, but not so much that, but enunciating that type of manufacturing is not coming back, and we need to invest in the type that will make us a leader, which is actually clean technology. It's talking about climate change and admitting that there are costs involved to change. But look at the costs you're already paying. We're on storm what? ETA? I don't even know. It's about being honest. Now, I know a lot of that is very, wishful thinking. And maybe you'll talk a bit about this, Eric, but that gets into the split within the Democratic Party. The climate change is a classic issue where the progressives, you've got AOC and many others, Bernie, who want to tackle it outright, where even moderates who this has to be something that's doable, that can pass. And we'll get to that in my roundabout way. Here's my kind of where I think there needs to be a bit of a come to Jesus moment. And I'm finally coming to my point of, I think AOC is a classic example of, she is hugely influential. I use her as an example because she's obviously very influential with this new wing.
Anna, tell our viewers who AOC is.
Alexandria Cortez. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, excuse me, representative from New York, Democrat, who really represents the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. She is very outspoken and is very influential. But I think she's also used by the conservative media as this boogeyman. I think, the media kind of taps into maybe some latent, the way we think of strong women. I mean, you don't want to put her up like there's still 434 other members of the House. She's not the most influential. And I think my point here gets to where both sides need to look at each other in terms of the hate that's being projected. When you talked about a deeply divided country, you may not agree with AOC's politics, but I was stunned to read about the type of death threats that not just she, but her mother, her former university dean get, which clearly escalate every time President Trump makes a tweet about her. I think you need to ask yourself, why in the world a man like Anthony Fauci, who's made it his life mission to improve people's health and is stepping up for this pandemic, requires 24/7 security? That is something Trump supporters need to ask themselves, in my opinion. And that it is a real problem. Now, I will say on the flip side, there was a rally a few weeks ago, Moms for Trump rally in DC. And a woman was interviewed and she made a point that I think resonated. She said, if I put up a Trump sticker, I'm called a racist or an idiot. And I think this gets to this phenomenon of the shy Trump voter, where they don't want to admit their support because they don't want to have to feel like they have to defend their views. And, on the one hand, you can also argue, listen, there's a lot of racism that surges through Trump's base. And if you do not denounce it more forcefully, there's this question of complicity. Right. But on the flip side, you can't dismiss that people have legitimate concerns about law and order. I mean, I think, granted, most of these protests that we've seen over the summer and then the fall, 98% have been peaceful. So you can't sit there and exaggerate, but you also can't dismiss things in Portland and Seattle that were taking place. And that, Trump, again, tapped into legitimate concerns of, again, law and order. And I think here you have this distortion where both sides need to, go past the extremes on their parties and look more at the moderates who have legitimate concerns and address them. And I think that that's my takeaway from everything is not just lower the volume and lower the hate. And I think you saw that in Biden's speech, in Delaware, of he is attempting to reach out, and now we need to see, will the other side calm down enough to accept that olive branch? And the longer Trump does not concede, the less likely that is to happen. So that was, I didn't have a long-winded intro. I had a long-winded middle. I make up for it somewhere. But I mean, you can certainly talk, and I was going to ask you can talk about that, but the other thing we haven't touched on is we almost know who's going to be on Biden's team. He's got like 300 people. A lot of it is, similar people, the establishment. I mean, what are some of your thoughts here, Eric? Because you have people who are, you don't have fresh blood, but you've also got people who know what they're doing, can bring an element of sanity back. I mean, what do you think of Biden going forward here with his team?
I think when Biden, just like President Trump made clear what the aftermath of this election would look like if he did not win, I think Joe Biden made it clear from the moment he entered this race what it would look like if he won. And we knew that Joe Biden not only had a deep well of experience having served in Washington for 4 decades, but he also had deep relationships with people that he worked with, people who we know their way around the White House, people who we know that can on day one begin the work of undoing a plethora of executive orders from the Trump administration, beginning with the Muslim ban. We know that he's going to move with protections for DACA recipients, and the United States will re-enter the Paris Climate Accords. So I mean, so it's those things. People who know, and the thing about it is, Trump came in, and we saw not only the level of inexperience within the president, but also the people around him. I mean, there were key ambassador posts. I wrote about this for the Diplomat, positions that weren't filled 2-3 years into his administration. Key posts, places like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan. And I don't think Joe Biden is going to have that problem, because I think Joe Biden has a very deep bench of experienced people who understand the complexities of many of these issues, who can move right in and understand what the issues are and begin to address them. And so I think right now, I mean, look, we're seeing this pendulum swing back. I mean, I think if you go back more than 30 years to when Bill Clinton got elected in 1992, the country said then, and they have been saying all the way through Donald Trump's election in 2016, they wanted someone different. They wanted someone who they thought was going to shake up this system. They wanted someone who they thought would do things differently. And the country just hasn't seen that. That's why they elected Bill Clinton. That's why they elected George Bush, Barack Obama. And I think we got to the far reaches of that thinking with Donald Trump. But now I think what you're seeing is people are saying, okay, we tried that. Now let's just go with someone who is a politician, someone who is a creature of Washington, someone who will just bring
a creature of calm as well. I mean,
sure.
And I think during normal times there's a legitimate debate to be had, although of the value of experience, where you don't have fresh thinking. I've always thought, though, ever since W. Bush, I don't get the whole personally, well, we don't want anyone with any Washington experience. I mean, I'm not going to trust my kids, college fund to somebody, that has no experience in financial planning just because I can have a beer with him. He's a cool guy. I mean, again, I don't think Trump ever took governing seriously enough to really even bring in people. It was this constant, carousel of hiring and firing and skeletal crews and preoccupation with these, scandals, real and imagined. And, I think President Trump squandered a lot of that initial power he had. I mean, I think in the first 2 years he could have passed infrastructure package, spending package. I think
For
there's so
sure.
much more
Yeah.
he could have done if he had bothered to get into a little bit more of, governing and understanding it. Now, that being said, I still think he's going to be the face of the Republican Party for quite a while to come.
Mhm.
So this leads to the question of, you have Biden, who, like you said, is a creature of Washington, who understands how to get things done. And by the way, I think that that's so important at this moment of coronavirus, because even if we get a vaccine, knock on wood, we do, government needs to figure out a whole supply chain of how to actually distribute that vaccine from, a freezer in Germany to Indiana. That's going to take government coordination. And that's exactly where you need people like Ron Klain, who understand how government works. You don't want chaos at that point. So I think, that's the advantage. But I completely forgot where I was going with.
This is the beauty of live television, everyone. This is why Donald Trump loves his job so much, by the way.
Oh, yes. So, well, and he might be having a channel. We were talking about his own digital streaming channel to compete with Fox. So we're definitely not hearing the last of anything. But I think this gets to, I'm curious to get your thoughts of how much Biden's going to be able to accomplish, especially past coronavirus. Now, we have what's happening in Georgia. And so the Senate is a complete toss up. There is a good chance that Republicans will hold the Senate. Now, on the one hand, Biden has worked with Mitch McConnell since, I think it was 1984. They're a year apart in age. They are the quintessential creatures of Washington. So there's obviously hope that they can work together. But I also think, even when Biden was vice president, Republicans were kind of dubbed the party of no. They just instantly, would not engage in the debate over Obamacare. And again, so you're going to have this thin razor margin, a good chance that the Senate will still continue to be controlled by Republicans, which would make Joe Biden the first Democrat since, I think, 1884 to become president, where his party's not in control of both chambers. So It's like, how much can you get done right off the bat? But how much can you get done with Trump still very much in the picture as the, driving force of the Republican Party? Would McConnell really go against Trump if he's telling 30-40% of his base, no, don't compromise?
That's a really good point, because I do believe much of the decisions that we see from a Congress, particularly a Senate, if it's Republican control, will be based on what Donald Trump will say, because we know, at least from his Twitter handle, he is going to be armchair quarterbacking. And that is going to be, the driving force of what his party does. And I think and that will make it difficult for Joe Biden to be able to address some of the issues. Now, of course, just like what we have seen from Donald Trump and from Barack Obama, when you have divided government, you go the way of executive order. And I think that's how we will see Joe Biden move a lot of his issues forward, if in fact he cannot get them through a Republican or divided Congress.
A barrage of executive orders from President Trump. I mean, to me, I think, coronavirus, I think there's a good chance the parties will come together. But after that, I don't see major legislation in terms of climate change. Like you said, there's been this, you talked about your book of the Civil War within the GOP. The Republican Party has been rejuvenated, but at what cost? Because you still have establishment Republicans, Mitch McConnell, even Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, they are establishment Republicans. They may go along with Trump, but you have to ask yourself, how much do they really go along with President Trump? And so I still feel like, they've been rejuvenated, but there's still this tension. I'm sure there are Republicans who want this issue of questioning and the recounts and all of this kind of, these lawsuits that, are some of them starting to look farcical to end, but they have been hesitant to cross Trump. And even if he's no longer president, I think that hesitancy will continue because he will now have an even bigger platform. He can start his own channel. He can have all the trappings of a presidency without all the, boring work behind it. And people will continue to view him as this martyr figure who voter fraud. That's why he lost the election. I mean, that is not going to go away. I mean, he's already talking about running in 4 years. I mean, so I don't know where you go. I think that's more a question for the Republican Party, really.
Well, no, but actually, if you go beyond just the national party, if you look at what happened in many of these states, Republicans did really well. And it's important to note for our audience in the United States, every 10 years we have what is called the census count, and what that does is that actually draws the lines for many of these districts. And so Republicans will maintain control of drawing a lot of these congressional districts, and we know that they will draw many of them such that they're favorable to them. And so I think that's something that allowed them to continue to maintain the power to be able to shape the Republican Party in a way that benefits them. And so I think that's one of the biggest wins for the Republican Party, not necessarily at the national level, because I think at the state level is where the Republican Party has always been really, really, really strong. Yeah. We did just get a question from one of our viewers, and we thank you for that. And you asked us what were some of the successes of Donald Trump in his 4 years in office. And I think one of the most glaring successes that he will talk about was his ability to normalize relations with many of Israel's neighbors in Israel. I think the Israeli Bahrain agreement and UAE agreement was something that the president certainly sought to tout during the last days of the election, and something that he certainly wanted to run on. And we know that Benjamin Netanyahu was a really, really close friend of Donald Trump's. And also that was a major sea change, because we know the relationship between Barack Obama and Benjamin Netanyahu was frosty at best. And also that relationship between MBS and President Donald Trump was something that was very close. Again, a major sea change between Barack Obama and the Saudis. But I do believe we're going to see a major reset in the Biden administration with Saudi Arabia, because in fact, even during President Trump's administration, there has been wide bipartisan support to be able to curtail U.S. engagement and U.S. relationships with Saudi Arabia, particularly in terms of its weapons support for Saudi Arabia, and as well as providing resources to them for that continued war in Yemen. So I think we're going to see a major sea change in the Middle East, but that was something that the president ran on. And I do believe those relationships will continue to normalize. I think there is momentum for that to continue. And I do believe that a president-elect Biden would like to see that as well. But I do believe he will give the Palestinians a greater voice than what we saw under a President Trump.
And I think, I think he will, but I think it's almost like, have the Palestinians missed the boat? I mean, I think it depends on your definition of victory. But, President Trump eliminated that roadblock that the Palestinian issue is going to be the thing that prevents normalization between Israel and the Arab world. And that is, that's huge. I mean, it really is. And, if you're very pro-Palestinian, that's not a victory for you, but it is about, he moved the needle. And I think on that question, to me, his biggest victories are entwined also with his biggest failures. And I say this with China and with North Korea. China, he again shifted the conversation fundamentally to China. Era of cooperation is over. We need to be more cognizant that they are a competitor. You may not agree with his tactics. I don't think tariffs is the ideal way to go about it. But he shifted that conversation. And that conversation is going to be there with Biden. On the flip side, I think his biggest failure was alienating the EU. and nitpicking over things that might be legitimate grievances, but you don't need to blow them out of proportion. Because if it was the US and EU tackling China together, I think you would have seen more movement. I think the biggest underreported thing about North Korea is I don't necessarily think that his outreach to Kim Jong Un was, it's as kind of ludicrous as a lot of foreign policy pundits said it was. It was something new. But the problem with it was the president's dismissal of diplomacy, of that nitty gritty work done by diplomats. I think if he had done those two things in conjunction with each other, set a meeting, I am going to reward Kim Jong-un with a meeting with no conditions. But at the same time, I expect my diplomats to be furiously working on the groundwork so that we even have a basis of what we even know what we're going to talk about. We know our definition of denuclearization,
Right.
because he went into that meeting not knowing those two disagreed on the most fundamental word. If he had relied on diplomats to prep him for that meeting and listen to them, then I think, it would have been interesting to see if his unconventional approach of awarding a meeting with Kim Jong-un, if that had actually produced anything, because it didn't in the end. It hasn't nudged their nuclear program one bit. But that's one of those things where, maybe his approach shouldn't have been discounted. It could have been a victory if he hadn't discounted the diplomacy angle of it. So, I think like his victories are mixed in an interesting way with what could have been on the foreign policy front. So we've got another question. I know we're going long, but it's the election. We've got a lot to talk about, and we're going to keep talking about it. So, Eric, I think this is a good question for you. So how do you see the transition crisis playing out? Really easy question.
Yeah, well, actually, I don't see it as a crisis at all. I think because the Constitution actually dictates what will and what is going to happen. I think the problem for most Americans is it's not happening the way we normally expect it to happen. But on January 20th, we will have a president of the United States, and it will be President-elect Joe Biden. That's number one. Number two, the fact that it is a President-elect Joe Biden, someone who has a deep well of experience, I think while the transition period is something that he certainly will need to be able to move as quickly as he can to combat many of these issues, whether it happens now or whether it happens on January 20th, you have someone with a team that will come in, again, who knows where everything is. They know where the bathrooms are, and they know where this, he knows where the situation.
Critical information.
Yeah, right. But he knows where the situation room is. So he can get to work on day one. And so while I do believe, again, and I think, this is a saying that we use a lot, iron sharpens iron. And, we cannot talk about American democracy, this shining city on the hill, without going through these types of challenges that show not only America, but the world that the system does in fact work. And so we are seeing the system work. We may be seeing it work in a way that we have not seen it work before, but nevertheless, it is working. And Joe Biden will come in on, now, if it had been a Donald Trump who entered on day one without a team, without a plan, that could be problematic. And in fact, we did see that happen because instead of focusing on actually putting together his cabinet and building a team, he was out doing rallies where he was railing against anyone else. But we have someone now who is a former vice president who has served, as chair of both the Judiciary and Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He can come in on day one and get the job done and get to work. And we already know where he is going to focus. He is focusing on healthcare. He's focusing on climate. He's focusing on the pandemic.
Right. And on that latter point, this is, you can, again, as I said, you can have the debate about experience, but when you're knee deep in a pandemic that unfortunately, is going to continue to rage, you certainly hope for a vaccine, but you can't pin all of your hopes on that. This is the time where you need somebody who knows how to work Washington, who knows what they're doing, who has experience, national experience in a health crisis. And then all the other issues at that point will be tackled in future episodes of Global 360. But I mean, right now it is all about the pandemic, and in an odd way, Biden's legacy hinges on the pandemic. You can't, in the months to come, unfortunately, what happens in a way will define him. This is what I think the people that truly voted for him, they didn't just want stability. It wasn't just about corruption and these kind of tweets and all this. It was, we're in a pandemic, we want it taken seriously, and we need stability in order to really attack this problem that is, it would be difficult for anybody, right. Republican, Democrat, sure. What have you. So I hope we answered some questions. We have a lot more questions, a lot more. I think this is a conversation that we need to have probably throughout the transition, because I do believe not only are many people here in the United States questioning what is going on, but I think the rest of the world is also watching to find out and figure out what is happening and what is going on. And we're happy to be that voice to walk you through this entire process. So this is a conversation I think we'll continue to have, and we'll have it until Joe Biden's eventual swearing in. And then long after. And on that note, you can actually join the conversation in multiple ways. If you prefer not to see us in our t-shirts, which I don't know why you wouldn't want to see us in our t-shirts.
Yeah, we're looking good today.
We're looking really good.
Right.
Your blue is brighter than my blue. I gotta adjust my lighting.
I think it's the lighting, yeah.
We're looking very spiffy, but it's okay. If you can't tune into the webcast, we are on podcast now, so you can subscribe. Just look up Global 360 on your Apple, Android, all of that fun stuff. Obviously, I'm so tech savvy that I can't think of anything other than Apple and Android, but we're all on there. And if not, you go to our website, you can click, we have podcasts, we have links to how you can subscribe to the podcast, but also all the links where you can watch the webcasts, and you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel to get alerts on when we have new videos. So basically, you can't ignore us. We are here. We are on every platform imaginable. We're
like Donald Trump. We're not going anywhere.
Now, we don't have our own digital streaming company. We're not there yet, but dude, 2021.
Just pop a hole in my balloon, will you? Okay, great. Thank you.
We'll get there. New year, new ambition. So anyway, thank you everyone for staying with us for our election analysis. We hope it provided a little bit of levity and sanity to these crazy times. Stay with us. Once again, we want to thank our sponsors, Cigna Global Health Services Company, as well as Sahori Insurance, which has been serving the diplomatic community for over 50 years. And again, thank you to our audience. Thank you to all the candidates for making our lives interesting. And we hope to see you next time.